However, when I woke up, the sky was dark. The moment I opened my eyes, a man's sleeping face caught my attention. There were dark eye circles around his eyes, and light stubble appeared around his chin. He was here the whole time. I looked around to see 4 white walls. This was the hospital ward. Out of instinct, I stretched out my hand and touched my tummy uneasily. Fortunately, there was still a slight bulge on my stomach, and it no longer hurt. "You're awake," the man beside me gruffly commented. I was momentarily stunned. When I turned to look in his direction, I realized that Ashton was awake. He got out of the chair and walked to my side to pour a glass of water. He placed the cup on my bedside table. "Do you want some water?" His emotions were hard to decipher, and I cautiously asked, "Am I still pregnant?" His pair of obsidian eyes pierced through my soul. He looked cold and terrifying. My heart was palpitating extremely fast as I widened my eyes and waited for his response. He took some time before breaking the silence. "How long were you planning to hide it from me?" There was no good answer to his question. Given this situation, there was no use in arguing with him. I held back my tears and stammered, "Rebecca forced you to make me abort the child by threatening suicide." I could not bear to do it, so I saw his expression turn ugly, but I continued, "I didn't want to lie to you. If you don't want anything to do with the baby, we can get a divorce. Once we file for it, we can go our separate ways. I will not let the baby affect your future with Rebecca." "Don't worry, Scarlett," he raged, and his eyes burned with anger. "Do I seem so pathetic to you that you don't even think I'm worthy as the father of our child?" Taken aback by his words, I croaked, "It's nothing of that sort. I was only worried that you wanted nothing to do with the baby given your relationship with Rebecca. Therefore, you decided to call the shots on your own." He sneered. I was sure that he would tear me into bits if I were not lying in the hospital bed then. "Scarlett, listen up. That is my child, and you better bring the child up well." This was the first time I witnessed Ashton ever being angry and yet happy at the same time. Judging from his reaction, it was clear that I was still pregnant, so I kept my silence. Not long after, a doctor in a white coat wailed in and explained the situation. He awkwardly looked at Ashton and advised, "The first trimester of a pregnancy is a crucial period. You should try to control yourself during this time." I bit my lips and watched Ashton nod with an uneasy look on his face. Luckily, there was nothing wrong with the fetus. The bleeding was only caused by the stress I was under recently. The doctor gave some advice before he left Ashton and me in silence. I knew he was angry and did not want to stay in the hospital any longer. I glanced at him. "Ashton, let's go home, okay?" He gave me a cold hard look. I sighed and explained, "Last night, I did not have dinner, and I am famished now," pointing to my belly. I gave him a pitiful look. "The baby needs to eat too." At first, I expected him to ignore me. However, Elle did not expect him to stand up and even suggest, "What are you craving? I'll buy it for you." Stunned, I cheekily smiled. I supported myself up and tugged on his clothes to reply, "I want to eat pork, grilled fish and also the noodles that you always cook." In fact, I wanted to trick him so that Elle could go home. It was unbearable to stay in the hospital for too long. Studying my expression, he reluctantly agreed. "I will settle the discharge papers now." Then, he sternly chided, "In the meantime, you should lie down." Seeing him exit the ward, I looked at the IV drip. There was not much left, so I pressed the bell for the nurse. She came in and took it out. "Is there any more medicine for me?" I could not wait to go home. The nurse replied, "There is no more Mrs. Fuller, you should lie down and rest. It took me by surprise. How did she know I was Mrs. Fuller? The nurse packed the medicine bottle and looked at me with some envy. Mrs. Fuller, your husband is very good to you. When you were sent to the operating room earlier, Mr. Fuller did not leave and looked very worried. Although he is an adult, he seemed like a helpless child waiting outside the operating room. I was puzzled, and my mind was buzzing. Ashton was worried for me. Or was he worried about our child? A penny for your thoughts. A low voice sounded beside my ear. I looked up and realized that the nurse was not there anymore. Instead, Ashton came in at some point in time and had a stack of documents in one hand and a bunch of medicine in the other. What are those? I lowered my head and looked at the medicine bag. In response, he stretched out his hand and helped me up. He carried me out of the hospital, but I quickly tried to get down. Ashton, let go of me. I can walk by myself. It was so awkward. If you want to go home, then you should listen to me and stop moving. That was how I got carried out from the hospital. I was embarrassed. After he put me down in the car, he took the driver's seat. Taking a look at me, he moved closer to me. It took me by surprise as I thought he was going to kiss me. Instinctively, I shrank back and stammered, Ashton, there are people outside. Far from what I imagined, he took the seatbelt from the other side and strapped me in. He smirked at me with his eyes gleaming. What were you thinking? I misunderstood the situation. I did not expect him to be reaching for my seatbelt. I forced a smile before turning my head to look outside the window. Unexpectedly, I felt a warm touch on my fingertips, and the warmth started spreading through my body. Surprised, I looked down to see Ashton holding my fingertips with one hand while driving with another. Sensing my gaze, he brought my hand up to his lips and kissed it. Apart from pork, grilled fish and noodles, is there anything else you want to eat? My heart raced. It was rare to share such warm and peaceful moments with him. As my face started to flush, I could only think about the warmth that lingered on my fingertips after he kissed them. I retracted my hand and voiced out, I can eat anything. Any food would sound good to me at this point. His deep laughter sounded through the car. Anyone could tell that Ashton was in a good mood today. When we arrived back at the villa, Ashton opened the door and helped me out of the car before Elle could even open the door for myself. I can walk on my own. I was not that delicate that I had to be carried in and out of the car. Come here, he demanded. Domineeringly, he picked me up and headed into the villa. He placed me on the sofa in the living room, then took out the medicine he brought back from the hospital. After taking a closer look at the bottles, he divided them and handed me a few black pills. He ordered, eat them. Unwilling to eat them, I frowned. In response to my reaction, he went to the kitchen and emerged with a white rock candy. After you take your medicine, you can eat this, and it would not be bitter anymore. Of course sometimes men can be dumb. These pills weren't even that bitter, so why would I have to eat it with rock candy? Taking the black pills in his hands, I popped them into my mouth. After I gulped the water to swallow them, I returned to the bedroom. If I stayed with Ashton any longer, I was worried that I would be clingy towards him. At first, I tossed and turned when I was in bed. Yet, I unknowingly fell asleep. Perhaps because I slept like a dead log, I did not realize that Ashton joined me in bed. The next day, I only woke up when it was way past noon. Opening my eyes, I saw Ashton's handsome face before me. He was so close that I could see the pores on his face. I had to admit that he had flawless skin. His facial features were sharp and attractive, exuding confidence. I could not help but reach my hand towards his face and gently caressed his stubble. He probably slept late last night and had been going back and forth for business trips recently. Therefore, he was still suffering from jet lag and fell into a deep sleep. I played with it for a while before my stomach rumbled. Since he was not awake, I wriggled in bed and wanted to get up to look for food. Unexpectedly, he lifted his leg and pressed me down. Maybe he thought of something and moved his leg. Ashton, I complained and tried to shift his leg away. His eyes fluttered open, and in a daze, he looked at me with sleepy eyes. You're awake already. I nodded and tried to wriggle out of the blanket. However, his long arms stretched out and encircled me. With a mesmerizing expression on his handsome face, he looked at me with a slight smile. Don't move. Although I usually seemed indifferent, but I am hungry, I whined with a slightly flushed face. He gave a short acknowledgement with his hoarse voice and pulled me closer to him. Ashton, you really are a pervert. I scorned. He was doing it again. Elle almost felt like a masochist for putting up with him time and again. Entering the bathroom, I washed my mouth out many times, but I could still smell it on my breath. Following that, he entered the bathroom too and hugged me from behind with a devilish smirk on his face. Elle ignored him and squeezed some toothpaste onto my toothbrush. He seemed excited and raised his eyebrows as he commented, "You'll be fine after a few more times." Annoyed, I raised my head and gave him a death glare. Then, I quickly brushed my teeth and left the bathroom. Somewhat affected by the pregnancy, when I sat in front of the dressing table, I felt like I had gotten even fatter. After applying some cream, I put on some light makeup and dragged myself to the closet to look for some decent clothes to change into. Meanwhile, Ashton came out from the bathroom and saw my changed outfit. Frowning, he demanded, "Elle, want you to change into another outfit?" "Why? There's nothing wrong with my clothes." It was summer in J City soon, so it was not ideal dressing in long sleeves. He walked to my side and scanned the closet. Grabbing a pale pink suit jacket, he passed it to me. "Put it on." I wanted to rebut, but he gave me a serious look. Without a choice, I silently put on the jacket. Shortly after, when we were heading downstairs, I heard a crackling sound from the kitchen. It shocked me, and for a moment, I thought it was a thief. However, Ashton seemed calm. Looking downstairs again, I realized that it was Mrs. Erickson. At the sight of us, Mrs. Erickson stopped her preparations, and with a smile on her face, she exclaimed, "Mr. and Mrs. Fuller, you are up. Breakfast is ready. You should eat it while it's hot. Don't starve yourselves." Post navigation. With a big grin on her face, Mrs. Erickson did a thorough clean-up of the villa. I couldn't help but look at Ashton for any indication. He did not utter a word but gestured for me to sit down and eat. "Ashton, did you get Mrs. Erickson to come over?" He waited till he swallowed the food in his mouth before finally saying, "Yes. It's better that she stays here to look after you." He was probably right, but I was still worried about Macy. After drinking some soup, I asked tentatively, "Ashton, Macy is still detained at the police station. Could you finish your meal?" he ordered before I could finish my sentence. What the? My morning sickness was getting more serious these days. There was more food coming out from my mouth than going in. I already lost all appetite after taking a few bites of food. Putting down my fork, I was about to go to the living room and wait for him to finish his food so that I could talk to him about Macy. However, I had not expected him to smack the table and bark, "Finish your food." Elle can't. My brows were pulled together into a frown. I couldn't take in any more food. Besides, I did finish a huge bowl of soup. He scowled at me. Finish the eggs, and we'll talk later. That sounded like there was possibly room for discussion. With that, I sat at the table again. However, I soon came to realize that I had been too naive. Right after I managed to force down the fried eggs, Ashton shoved a slice of cake and a glass of milk in front of me and said, "Have these too." I couldn't take it anymore and barked back at him. "I am not a pig. You know." Ignoring my protest, he continued to order me, "Lust eat. It's nutritious." This man could really rile me up to no end. I am on the brink of bursting, and I really can't stuff food down my throat anymore, I retorted. Despite my pleas, he remained silent and motionless, as though the world was hinging on me finishing my food. My head was pounding so badly that I had to massage my temples as I tried to gain his sympathy. "Please, I really am full. If I stuff any more food down my throat, it's just gonna come right back up. That's the worst part. Just eat, and we'll deal with that when it happens." Son of a. Why are you being such a jackass? I shot him a deadly look while stuffing the stupid cake into my mouth and washing it down with the milk. Seeing that his will was obliged, he was pleased with himself, cocking a brow. "I thought you already knew that from the beginning." "I did. Forget it. I need his help to settle something more important. As I was saying, Macy has already been held at the police station for one whole day, so could you. And you're worried about her." Obviously. However, Ashton did not seem concerned at all. He was now sitting comfortably on the couch, sipping the tea Mrs. Erickson brought him as though he was on a freaking holiday. The little warmth that I had felt in the morning was now fumes coming out of my ears. I looked at my watch and realized that it was already 1 in the afternoon, but Ashton did not seem like he was going to the office or the police station. At this rate, I might as well take matters into my own hands. I went upstairs to get my handbag and was about to head to our bar when Ashton stopped me mid-stride and asked nonchalantly, "Where are you going?" "To the police station." Frankly, I felt that he had no intention to help me at all. He pondered over something for a while before jumping into the driver's seat of my car. "Come in." I got into the passenger seat, still oblivious to his plan. After a while, I realized he was not driving to the police station. Instead, we were on the way to the office. "Ashton, I will deal with Macy. You're going to stay in the office and not cause any trouble, okay?" That did not sound convincing at all, and why was he talking to me like I was a child? But it didn't seem like Elle had much of a choice, considering that he was the one behind the wheel. I took a deep breath and zipped my lips. When we arrived at Fuller Corporation, he dropped me off at the lobby and drove away. Once I stepped into the office building, I bumped into none other than that jerk, Joe. I was not in the greatest of mood and wanted to just ignore his presence. "It's already noon. Did you go for a meeting?" Such an annoying person. "Mr. Whën, are you working in the HR department now? If not, why don't you just mind your own business?" I shot him a glare and retorted calmly while pressing the elevator button. Joe seemed equally irritated as he snorted, "Well, I was told that your good friend is currently locked up at the police station. And here you are, waltzing in casually at noon as if all's good. You're more cold-blooded than I thought." After being bossed around by Ashton this morning, I had had it up to here, and now he just struck the match that kindled my explosion. "Is it because you've been such a lapdog to Rebecca for so long that you forgot how to talk like a human? Your loyalty to Rebecca is really commendable, but I can't help but wonder, is it because she plays catch with you all the time or because you get to learn tricks from the greatest?" Pretentious snob in the office. As I fired away, something suddenly came to mind. Oh, and there's something you should know. Although our bar is registered under Rebecca's name, her assets basically all came from Ashton. If it pleases me, I can always hire a lawyer to repossess them. As Ashton's legal spouse, I don't foresee it being an issue. You think you're better than me. He was not prepared for my counterattack and now looked like he had swallowed a bitter pill, fumbling for more insults. At that moment, the elevator door opened, and I shot him one last dirty look. I sincerely hope to see you upgrade from a second-rated bootlicker to a first-class minion. See you around. Imagining smokes coming out of Joe's ears made me forget about Ashton pissing me off this morning. When I stepped into my office, there was already someone waiting for me. Stacy quickly walked up to me and said, "Ms. Stovall, Mr. Harrison from Harrison Credit has been waiting for you all morning in your office." After nodding in acknowledgement, I told Stacy to fetch me a glass of warm milk. Upon entering my office, I saw Nick sitting comfortably in my chair with his legs up and eyes closed as though he had been resting for a while. He heard me walking in but did not bother to open his eyes. "Ms. Stovall, do you always come to the office whenever it pleases you?" Ignoring his sarcasm, I set aside my handbag and sat down on the couch. Stacy came over with my milk and asked, "Ms. Stovall, do you want me to bring over all the audit reports for Fuller Corporation?" I shook my head and took a sip of milk before suggesting to Nick, "I suppose you have already received the message. Since you're here, shall we sign the contract right away?" Nick finally opened his eyes, half squinting them at me while he said, "Does this mean you have decided to collaborate with us?" Furrowing my brows, I took a deep breath to ease the numbing ache radiating from my lower back. Then I turned to Stacy and asked her to bring the contract over. After receiving it, Nick merely glanced through the papers without an ounce of seriousness and signed the contract on the spot. I was only responsible for the signing of the agreement, and the next step would be for Harrison Credit to liaise directly with our finance department. That part was out of my scope. But Nick did not seem like he was ready to leave, so I shot him a questioning look. "Mr. Harrison, is there anything else?" Hearing that, he stood up and walked over to sit next to me. "Let's have lunch together." I really did not have the patience for this brat, so I turned to Stacy. "Go downstairs and get Mr. Harrison some takeout." Stacy was a little startled but nodded her head nonetheless and retreated from my office to get his lunch. Nick was disappointed and tried to protest. "Hey Scarlett, that was a sincere request to have lunch with you. Did you have to turn me down like that?" Feeling annoyed, I gave him a cold glare. "Mr. Harrison, in terms of work, my job here is done. As for personal relationships, I'm married, so I appreciate it if you could keep your distance." Massaging my temples, I walked back to my desk and pulled out Hightech's file. After settling Fuller Corporation's audit, there were still more Hightech cases to follow up. Just thinking about all these pending matters made my headache worse. I could not understand what was going through youngsters' minds these days. Did they not fathom social cues at all? I thought I had made myself crystal clear about not wanting to have anything further to do with Nick, and yet he was still lingering in my office like a fungal infection. Well, he could suit himself. I'll just get started with my work. Right then, Stacy returned to the office. Placing the takeout in front of Nick, she said politely, "Mr. Harrison, your lunch." Nick was not amused at all and replied sarcastically, "Well, thank you so much." Responding with a faint smile, Stacy walked toward me. "Ms. Stovall, Mr. Lo from AC Credit has come looking for you a few times. Would you like to see him? I opened my inbox to check for new emails, but there were none. Not at the moment, Stacy. I knew this would come back to haunt me. We skipped over the winner of the open tender and gave the job to Harrison Credit. As expected, there was no way AC Credit would let this go so easily. This was far from over. If you asked me, I'd say go see him. You may be surprised. Nick interrupted while eating his takeout. I almost forgot to inform you. Harrison Credit will only be responsible for Fuller Corporation's audit. We won't be dealing with any of your subsidiaries. Furrowing my brows, I asked, what do you mean by that? He slowly laid his fork down and looked at me. You heard me. Correct me if I'm wrong. Fuller Corporation went public last year and merged with Whën Corporation. So I suppose their finance falls under your supervision as well. At that point, he was starting to get on my nerve. You're saying you will only handle Fuller Corporation's audit but not Whën Corporation's? He nodded and said, Fuller Corporation's financial reports are massive and complicated as it is. If we are to include Whën Corporation's, we won't be able to catch up with the release of next quarter's financial statements. I was almost hyperventilating after listening to his assertion. That's nonsense. The two companies were already merged last year, and they're now operating under the umbrella of Fuller Corporation. If your company is going to handle the parent company's audit, you have to include Whën Corporation as well. He smirked and said, Ms. Stovall, I don't think so. Piece of shit. I walked right into his freaking trap. Stacy, please escort Mr. Harrison out of my office. I wasn't sure whether I could stop myself from punching his stupid face if he stayed any longer. I needed to discuss this with Ashton immediately. This was just the right recipe for chaos. Before leaving with the takeout in his hands, Nick turned around and emphasized, I shall remind you that we have just signed a legally binding agreement, so I'd advise you against screwing us over. Such an idiot. Get out. My whole body was trembling with anger. Ha ha ha. Take care, Ms. Stovall. He continued to laugh on his way out. My head was pounding again, and I was very close to losing my sanity. Having two auditors working for one company is just ridiculous. Ms. Stovall, should we get AC Credit to take over the whole job? Mr. Harrison doesn't seem very reliable, Stacy suggested. You're preaching to the choir, sister. But Ashton explicitly said he wanted Nick to handle this job. I paused briefly before telling Stacy, I've got to talk to Ashton about this. On top of the matter with Macy, now I had a plate full of contractual issues to worry about, and my head was about to explode. Speaking of whom, Ashton still hadn't indicated if he was going to help her or not. I could no longer sit back and do nothing. As I packed up my stuff, Elle instructed Stacy, keep an eye on Nick for me. In the meantime, I will speak to Ashton about the other matter. Also, see if there is any need to go outstation for inspection and put everything in a report for me. Stacy was worried about my well-being. Ms. Stovall, are you sure you're all right? Elle assured her that I was fine and headed out. Since Ashton took my car, I had to take a cab to the police station. There was not much progress in Macy's case, and she was to be held for 15 days for further investigation. After arriving at the police station, I managed to talk to the officer who was interrogating Macy yesterday. Unfortunately, he just reiterated what I already knew. There was no substantial development. Just as Jared had said before, the security cameras in the hotel were broken that night. In other words, there was no admissible evidence. As such, I was not allowed to see Macy until they concluded their investigation. Feeling helpless, I headed over to our bar only to find out that the bar was cordoned off and no one was allowed in. It was times like this that made me realize the cold hard truth of the invisible caste system that governed this society. The whole network was complicated yet interconnected. It would be nearly impossible for me to gather enough evidence to free Macy all by myself. I thought Ashton would be at one of these two places, but I guessed I was wrong about him again. His call came in while I was sitting in front of our bar like a deflated balloon. His background was noisy, but his voice was clear. "Where are you?" "I am in the office." I dared not tell him where I really was. However, Elle immediately came to regret the lie Elle just told when his voice became cold and distant. "Since when is your office in such a dump?" Stunned, I looked up to see my own car plate 6 feet away from me, and there it was. The unmistakable pair of icy obsidian black eyes which were staring at me. Oh, that explained the noisy background. Oh, I might as well. At that thought, I walked over and climbed into the passenger seat. As I leaned back against the seat, I puffed out about a gallon of air and asked, "What are you doing here?" "That should be my question for you," he retorted, sounding displeased. Ignoring his rhetorical question, I closed my eyes and massaged my temples. Nick from Harrison Credit said they are only responsible for Fuller Corporation's audit. They want nothing to do with Whën Corporation. "Let AC Credit handle it," he replied succinctly and started the car. I was still confused. Both companies, or just Whën Corporation? Driving past a traffic light, he looked at me and scoffed. "Do you plan to breach a contract you just signed?" "Ah, I did just sign a contract with Harrison Credit. So it's only natural that Whën Corporation's audit is to be handled by AC Credit." Right then, my shoulders and back were acting up again. I was trying to get comfortable on the seat when I realized we were not heading home. "Where are we going?" "Dinner." He had always been cold and distant, so I continued to keep my mouth shut. But as he parked the car in a shopping mall's underground car park, I could not help but ask, "We're having dinner at a shopping mall. Is he taking me shopping before dinner?" That's quite romantic of him. Still not answering any of my questions, we got out of the car and walked into the mall together. I never liked walking next to him. He was tall and handsome but detached, just the right combination that was bound to attract unwanted attention. Naturally, most of the attention came from women. Some were shy and inward, while others stared at him openly. Marching behind him with my head down, I muttered, "Show off." Abruptly, he came to a halt, causing me to bump into his back. Ouch. "Why did you stop all of a sudden? Don't space out while walking." He then pulled me into a branded store and ordered, "Pick something nice. We're meeting a few people tonight." "What people?" I froze momentarily as I knew that fashion was really not one of my strong suits. Seeing that I failed to choose something he considered good enough, he instructed a shopping assistant to come to my rescue. After some time, we finally agreed on a floral dress with a beige blazer. I was actually quite satisfied with the attire. In fact, it would be perfect if paired with nice heels. Unfortunately, Ashton rejected my request to wear heels. In his own words, pregnant women shouldn't wear high heels. There was just no winning with him. But 3 centimeters heels are not tall at all. It wasn't until we got back into my car that I realized he took me to the shopping mall just to get an outfit. Ashton Fuller. I pouted my lips and protested as he started the car. Yes, this man was a serious driver. He took a quick glance at me before his eyes were back on the road. "I am mad at you." I wasn't sure why I was irritated, but my anger had to be vented. I thought he was finally being nice to me and going to take me shopping. The man raised his eyebrows, seeming be amused by me. What are you mad at? What am I mad at? I have no idea either. Elle just kept quiet and tried to suppress my frustration. My hand was suddenly enclosed by his. A warm feeling channeled from my hand to my heart. A dulcet, pleasant voice flowed out of Ashton's mouth as he spoke. Being emotional is bad for the baby, so don't be angry. Yeah, right. Some sweet moments could really last forever. Years later, memories like this one would be the only thing that I could still hold on to. Our car stopped in front of a lavish and elegantly designed villa. I was befuddled. So when you said we'd be meeting a few people, you actually meant we're visiting someone? Ashton gestured for me to get out of the car and handed the car key to the valet parking driver. He then leaned into me and whispered in my ear, just meeting a few friends. Why did he have to make everything so secretive? I followed him into the villa and saw a well-dressed middle-aged woman welcoming us with a broad beam across her face. It's been a while, Ashton. Then, the woman turned to me and smiled politely. And this must be Mrs. Fuller. Ashton nodded and extended his hand to shake hers. Good to see you, Ms. Anderson. Sorry that we kept you waiting. Ms. Anderson. After sizing this woman up, I finally recognized her. She was Nick Harrison's mother, Cameron Anderson. I wonder what Ashton had in mind taking me here. After we exchanged pleasantries, Cameron led us upstairs to where the dining hall was. A few people were already seated at the table. They appeared to be a few middle-aged men and their wives. Cameron got us all seated and arranged for her helper to bring out the food, after which she turned to all the guests. Thank you for being here today. It's been a long while since we were able to invite everyone for a gathering like this. So, let's all have a good time, and please make yourselves at home. Haha, hold on, Cameron. You have yet to introduce this young couple to us. The voice came from a middle-aged, slightly plump man. Although he said that with a smile, his stately demeanor was apparent. Cameron laughed. What's the hurry, Mr. Clinton? This is the young and successful Mr. Fuller whom I was always telling you about. The lady next to him is his wife, Mrs. Fuller. The hostess went on to introduce her guests to us one by one. After a round of introduction, it finally dawned on me that this was no ordinary dinner gathering. These were all prominent and powerful people in politics and business. While we were dining, Cameron mentioned some interesting local news she had come across lately. I wasn't sure if she did that deliberately, as she was now talking about quinine and how difficult it was for her to source some for medical use. According to her, it had not been seen on the market for decades. Clinton joined in. Speaking of which, I did come upon a case involving quinine yesterday. But if you're only after medical use, just a few grams should do. Cameron shook her head and quickly added, That's the problem, Mr. Clinton. I was just sharing this with Mrs. Fuller the other day. Bless her, such a nice girl. She actually got a friend of hers to go looking for it. And guess what happened? Her friend's now being locked up at the police station. I was stunned for a few seconds and then realized she was referring to me when she said, Mrs. Fuller. She said we met the other day. And since when were we this close? I turned to Ashton to gain some clarity, but he was looking at Clinton casually. Clinton was a clever person. After all, he did not climb all the way to his position by being insensitive. He knew in an instant that Cameron was dropping hints. His weathered eyes, however, were looking for my way when he said, I didn't know you and Cameron are so close. May I know what's your friend's name so that I can check on this? If it's indeed a misunderstanding, it'd be unfair to your friend. I got up and held out my glass of orange juice toward Clinton and thanked him in my sweetest voice possible. Thank you so much for your help, Mr. Clinton. Her name is Macy Markle, about my age. I'm pregnant, so I will toast you with this orange juice instead. Really appreciate your help. Clinton let out a hearty laugh and said, I like your attitude. Cheers. Phew, it sounds like Macy would be okay after all. As we continued to drink and dine, the guests were more loosened up. Clinton and Cameron had had quite a few to drink and were now reminiscing the past. The man looked at Cameron and spoke empathetically. All these years, you've been searching for your kid. Are you getting any closer to finding her? A hint of desolation crept over her refined features. It has been more than 20 years, but there's not a single piece of useful information. I'm not even sure if she's still alive. Clinton sighed and offered his consolation. Don't give up. I'm sure things will start looking up soon. I had eaten quite a bit of food, so when the next dish was served, I felt my stomach churned. And so, I left my seat and headed to the toilet. Ashton came over to check on me. Are you all right? I am okay. Just a little nauseated. Elle only started experiencing morning sickness, so this was considered mild. When I was well enough to speak, I asked him, do you understand what Mr. Clinton and Ms. Anderson were talking about just now? I thought she only has a son. He then led me out of the toilet and seated me down at a chaise longue in the corridor. Placing his big hand on my lower belly, the man slowly explained, Ms. Anderson had another marriage before she married Nick's father. She and her ex-husband had a daughter, but he abandoned the child, and Ms. Anderson has been looking for her since then. Ashton's warm palm did not leave my lower belly as he spoke. I had never seen such a gentle expression on his face. With a smile, I looked at him and asked, Ashton, do you really like babies? We had been married for 2 years now. Previously, I was nothing more than a walking wallpaper to him. But since he learned that I was carrying his child, his attitude had taken a positive change. I had always believed that there were only 2 types of love between a man and a woman. It was either love at first sight or people falling in love with each other gradually over time. But with Ashton, it was neither. To him, the only catalyst seemed to be his unborn child. He dodged my question and walked me back to the dining table. It was a lengthy and drawn-out dinner. By the time we left Pear Garden, it was already past my bedtime. I soon fell asleep in the car. When we arrived at our villa, Ashton carried me to the bedroom without waking me. The next morning, I was woken up by my ringing phone, and Ashton was nowhere in sight. I looked at my phone and was surprised to see that it was Macy calling. Babe, I'm free. I am free. Macy's voice was full of excitement, sounding as though she was panting and running. Still perplexed, I wanted to double-check with her. You mean the officers have finished investigating the matter and finally decided that you were innocent? Yes. The officer said the traces of quinine they found in my cupboard was within the legally allowed amount of possession for medical use, so they let me go. Hearing Macy so elated made me heave a sigh of relief. That's great. Try and get some rest now. We're going out to celebrate tonight. Yes. Let's have barbecue, steak, seafood. She rattled off all the food she could think of, and I agreed to all of them. All right. Go home now and take a nap. I'll call you when I get off work later. Okay. My mood was also elevated after hanging up the phone. I remembered that when I was little, my teacher was always telling us kids that the world was a just place. Everything we did would fall under only one of 2 camps, either right or wrong. But over the years, I inevitably learned that there was no absolute right or wrong in this world. Just as we shouldn't judge a book by its cover, we couldn't categorically declare a person as wholly good or evil. After washing up, I went downstairs to see a feast already prepared by Mrs. Erickson. She smiled at me and said, "Good morning. Come and try a few of these dishes. Let me know which ones you prefer." My eyes searched one round for Ashton but to no avail. As I sat at the table, I was astonished by the amount of food laid out in front of me. "Mrs. Erickson, this is too much food." Still smiling, Mrs. Erickson shook her head and said, "Not at all. Mr. Ashton said you ate too little. Pregnant women need more food intake." Speaking of whom, do you know where he is? He was nowhere to be found since this morning. He has gone to the office. Someone kept calling him since early morning. Mrs. Erickson muttered. I nodded in acknowledgement while planning my day ahead in my head. Given my recent tough luck of always bumping into that good-for-nothing jerk Joe Quinn, I'd better make sure I was on time today. I was ready to get out after taking just a few bites but was stopped by Mrs. Erickson, who put some fruits in a container and insisted that I bring it with me. Knowing she only meant well, I gave in and took it before getting into the car. I was glad that I did not bump into Joe when I arrived at the office building. Stepping out of the elevator, someone grabbed hold of my arm and swung me around. The world was still spinning before my eyes when a hand landed loudly on my cheek. Slap.